Hello and welcome to the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bercia, Special Assistant to the President for Global Perspectives. Our guest today is Dr. Sanam Vakil, who is a visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies in Washington and in Bologna, Italy. Welcome, Dr. Vakil.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
Your specialty, among other things, is Iran, and we're interested, given all of the discussions taking place in Washington today and in light of the tensions of recent years, what you think might be happening in the very near future between the United States and Iran.
Well, all signs are pointing towards some form of discussion, you might call it flirting, that is taking place between these two former flames in the region. And I think what we might see over the next year, I don't think it's going to be very overt and direct and public, but I think we're going to see some cooperation between both countries on regional issues initially. And I think both the Iranians and the Americans hope to cooperate on issues in Afghanistan, Iraq, and then for the Obama administration, expand those issues to address some of the more menacing concerns with regards to Iran's nuclear proliferation program and its sponsorship of terrorist groups in the Middle East and opposition to the State of Israel.
Where do you think this might start? You said that it would be subtle, most likely. Do you expect it to be at the presidential level or at a lower level? And what form might it take over the next few months?
From the American perspective.
From the American side.
I think from the American perspective, it will be supported from the White House, but I think that all initiatives and directives are going to take place from the State Department. And perhaps, I believe the arena of Afghanistan is going to be perhaps the area where we can see more direct cooperation. One, because it's a very pressing concern for both countries, and two, because back when the United States began their operation to remove the Taliban in 2001, Iran and the United States had successful cooperation until 2003. And so there is a history there, which is very important.
What do you think the prospects are in Afghanistan? You know, this has been such a trouble spot for so many nations and empires in the past, and there are some who look at it in a very negative way as being a potential Vietnam or graveyard for the United States as well. Do you agree with that, or do you think we have the opportunity and the possibility of resolving that crisis?
Well, I think it's very easy to be negative about Afghanistan, mainly because it's such a vast country with such a diverse group of different ethnic communities, and we just haven't been there long enough to truly understand the culture and the impact of the history on the Afghan population. However, I like to think that I'm an optimist, and I think that we do have a possibility to bring about, let's say, a more peaceful environment. But that possibility is going to require not just an American effort. It's going to require greater cooperation from NATO, from EU countries, and of course the Russians and Central Asian neighbors, and Pakistan, India, and Iran. So it's going to have to be really a worldwide effort, because out of Afghanistan, we are affected by the drug proliferation that is spreading all the way to Europe, and I'm sure eventually makes it to the Middle East, but it's also going to Africa. There are concerns over terrorism, obviously, and all of these issues of instability can of course spread, and that should be a greater concern as well.
What kind of time frame are we looking at here? It seemed that when we first participated in the intervention in Afghanistan, that this was something that was likely to be resolved in 2, 3, 4 years. Now it's stretched out much longer than that, and the tide has turned in favor of the adversary, or seems to be, in some respects, turning in favor of the adversary. What do you think our time frame is likely to be?
Right. It's hard to say. I wouldn't even be able to give you an honest assessment because I don't know. What I can tell you is I think that our initial idea that 3 or 4 years was naive, because we didn't understand the extent of the economic poverty in the country, the lawlessness. Almost every institution and issues of governance had to be created from scratch, and you have to put that in the context of the cultural issues of a country that has been so isolated from the world, not developed, etc. So I would foresee our involvement, if not on a military level, but indirect through development organizations and whatnot, a very long time until Afghanistan gets back on its feet with responsible leadership, local leadership, and a modernizing population, really.
Going back to Iran, we have an election coming up later this year, and some interesting possibilities for the results. Tell us what, obviously you can't predict the outcome, but based on what you know at this stage, what do you think is likely to happen?
Okay. Well, we just celebrated the 30th anniversary of the Iranian Revolution, which is probably a feat that most American politicians never thought would be achieved in Tehran, so it was a momentous occasion. But at the same time, former President Khatami used the occasion to announce his candidacy for the June elections. And there was a lot of speculation around whether he would run again. And of course, there continues to be speculation as to whether he has a viable chance. And it's likely, although his candidacy has not been officially declared, that President Ahmadinejad will run again. Now, Ahmadinejad has been a controversial president, obviously from our perspective in the West, but also at home. He has a lot of rural support and support from traditional Iran and the lower class Iranians who have suffered over the past 30 years because he's promised oil money to be spread around, distributed more equitably, let's say. But because of sanctions, the declining oil prices and whatnot, coupled with the president's own lack of understanding of economic issues, the economy has suffered. And as a result, all Iranians are suffering.
And has that worsened under the current recession? And is that something that's being noticed by even those groups that have supported him in the past?
Yes, it's being noticed by everybody because inflation rates have doubled. If I don't know what the unofficial statistics are, but the official statistics are double digits, high double-digit numbers, and the unofficial must be in the 30%, and that puts a massive amount of pressure on the average person when prices of bread and rice are going up. The government also can't afford to maintain the subsidies that are so important for the lower classes and the people that are dependent on the regime. So this, in effect, has strained Ahmadinejad both at an elite level, where he's received a lot of criticism publicly, even from a number of economists, but also at the popular level. That all being said, I think that it's going to be an interesting few months because as we move forward, it's very clear that there's some warming of relations with the United States, which of course some analysts say could help bolster Ahmadinejad in the election. There are a lot of issues that are going to come in. I think that in official poll numbers also, Khatami and Ahmadinejad are polling quite equally as well. So I think the outcome is very much going to depend on how many Iranians, particularly the youth, who have been quite disaffected over the past few years, come out to vote, and how much the government, the traditional elite, feel threatened by the prospect of Khatami returning into the system.
Now, if you could express a preference, which of the two would you like to see, not in terms of the one that you necessarily like, but the one that you think might be more effective, especially if we're talking about a serious overture from the United States in opening the relationship?
Sure. I think, obviously, from a more aesthetic standpoint, I would like to see Khatami win because he presents Iran with a nice face, and he was very successful at bringing Iran out of the cold and restoring Iran's relationships. However, he wasn't a very effective politician in representing the interests of all of the wide spectrum of the elite, and that was why a lot of the problems ensued over the course of his presidency. So if I have to put my personal preferences aside and my pride aside, I would support Ahmadinejad, because I think that it's easier to deal with the devil you know. You know where Ahmadinejad stands on every issue. And Ahmadinejad is likely to become more of a centrist as the election season goes forward and as moderation towards the United States progresses. And so it would be in our interest to have a dealer that has made his positions very clear in the past.
Now, would a softening in the relationship, the tensions in the relationship between the United States and Iran, help one candidate or the other?
I think that both sides are going to use the relationship to their advantage. Already, Ahmadinejad has come out, I believe, around the time of the 30th anniversary and the celebrations around that time, saying that he would like to support and encourage rapprochement with the United States based on mutual respect, which is a common terminology that the Iranians use. And at the same time, a number of other political leaders have said the same thing. So I think it's a race between a number of these elites as to who's going to get there first. And for the conservative establishment, I don't think it's in their interest to allow the reformists and reformist politicians like Khatami to add that to their legacy. So it's going to be a toss-up, but I think they will likely give it to Ahmadinejad.
If you were advising the Obama administration on what next steps it should take with Iran, what would those recommendations be?
I would definitely suggest to start with negotiations as soon as possible, because I think that in the past we have added too many clauses to this process of negotiation. And if we wait until after the election, we are signaling that the elections are important for our decision-making process on how we go forward. And it might be important, and I believe it is important, but it's important that we show the Iranian regime that the United States is beginning to recognize the legitimacy of this regime, which has been one of the most important obstacles in this relationship. So I think that would be my first recommendation. Second, I would suggest that the Obama administration appoint an official envoy, someone who would be the official face of the administration, not someone too senior, but that could conduct talks as a representative of the president and the Secretary of State. And this person has to be obviously a balanced and experienced diplomat, one who would not get frustrated by what negotiations are going to evolve into with Iran, because the Iranians are very good negotiators. Anyone who's been to a bazaar will know what it takes to get a carpet out of an Iranian merchant. It takes a lot of work, and the Iranians are already signaling that they are going to try to push the limits. They have a lot of chutzpah, and they're going to use this to their advantage, and it can be very frustrating, particularly for the United States, who has signaled very overtly that they want to move forward with Iran.
Now, is this a responsibility that you think should be added to the portfolio of someone like George Mitchell, or do you think it should fall to someone else so that there would be an exclusive focus on the Iran piece, not just on a broad Middle East
Ideally,
approach?
A third person would be designated, maybe not given the same position or the extent of responsibility as Ambassador Mitchell or Ambassador Holbrooke, but someone who would be the point person that could bring together all of the issues between Iran and the United States and know how to approach them at the appropriate time, so that the issues don't get muddled, really.
Let's talk a little bit about Iran's desire to diversify its energy sources. where are you on this topic? Are you concerned about the potential negative applications of its nuclear research program, or do you think it is really oriented toward legitimate energy desires?
I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't want to see nuclear weapons in the hands of any other nation, let alone Iran. But I think that the Iranians are using this program, which they have a long list justifying the legitimacy of their program, including that of energy, to their advantage with the international community. It's become a piece of leverage, really. And I think that that's what they're going for. This is our piece of leverage. We are slowly developing all of the components that we need. They are still operating within the confines of the NPT agreement. So I think they want to use this as a bargaining chip. However, in Iran, I've also heard many people say that also within this gray line, that this program represents our status in the Middle East, our signals that we are a modern nation, a technological nation. And for a lot of Iranians, it's become a source of national pride. And the government has been very skillful at using the program to justify all of the expense and to generate pride among Iranians as well. So I think there will be some bargaining going on.
Tell us a little bit about your current research. Have you had a chance to go to Iran recently? And where do you think your research is going to take you as these issues develop and unfold?
Of course. I have had a number of chances to go back over the past few years. And thus far I've been quite fortunate. Unlike many of my colleagues, I can still travel and can do so quite comfortably in Iran. And I received a grant to write a book on women's activism in Iran, really focusing on how this activism has evolved over the past 30 years and focusing on the evolutionary relationship between women and the government, using women as a lens to sort of examine civil society development in Iran. So it's been a very positive experience. I've learned a lot. I'm not a women's studies expert by any means, but it's been very interesting to explore how women have been the unpredicted beneficiaries of the revolution in a number of realms, despite the legal limitations of living under a traditional interpretation of Islamic law. Women have prospered in the sense that Khomeini ironically gave them the right to vote. At the same time, today women outnumber men at the university level. Literacy levels are incredibly high, over 90%. And women have an active presence in all aspects of Iranian life, from cab driving to engineering to in the medical profession. They're everywhere. They're integrated into Iranian society. But of course, there are limitations as well. And because women have become educated and are needed at the same time by the regime, they have learned to adapt using creative means of expression to challenge these patriarchal norms. And to some degree, things have gotten better. They have succeeded in overturning some laws, pushing for new ones and whatnot. But it's not necessarily, I would say it's a cultural problem, not necessarily a governmental one. Changing the mindset of a generation of traditional men is very difficult.
When you talk about challenging the government, what would be some examples of things that you've seen, and maybe you could provide some insights into life in Iran today that might differ from the popular view that a lot of people have of how repressive it is?
Of course. Well, I must mention that, of course, Islamic law has a very patriarchal interpretation of very common legal aspects that we take for granted. For example, in Iran, women have a harder time getting a divorce, or are more likely to lose the custody of their children after a certain age to the fathers. They receive half of the inheritance of their brothers, for example, and on and on and on. So basically, in essence, you might think that women are worth half of a man. Now, slowly and sort of subtly, women have obviously returned into the labor force, returned into the political scene, and are active journalists, active artists, and using all of these different venues to put pressure on the regime. Such that, for example, now there have been new interpretations suggesting that women are not half of a man in certain legal rulings. For example, if you kill a man, you're supposed to provide the family its blood money. And if you kill a woman, this was a big cartoon a few years ago, it's cheaper. So this concept has been reversed such that it is now men and women are equal in receiving this blood money. So they're slow gains, and they've received more divorce rights, more custodial rights and whatnot. So on the one hand, they're pushing back using institutional means. At the same time, they become more confrontational because they've been frustrated as they've become more educated, more integrated into social and political life. They've become disappointed by the fact that the government has not provided more sweeping reforms. And so there have been more grassroots campaigns, one which is modeled after the Moroccan example, called the 1 Million Signatures campaign, where women activists go around and are trying to gain 1 million signatures to challenge the inequality between men and women that is enshrined in the Iranian constitution. So from that standpoint, they have been more confrontational. On a social level as well, I think that the Western media in particular portrays Iran as maybe a very traditional society that isn't very dynamic and lives under a repressive culture, whereas in reality, I think any foreigner that comes to Iran is pleasantly surprised by the dynamism and the vivacity of life for both men and women. The youth are very active, they're educated, they find a variety of means of expression, they're sportive, they're artistic, they're great writers and artists, cinematographers. And what's, I think, the most important lesson that I draw every time I go back is that this is a society that is learning to challenge the norms in unconventional ways. And I think that's very important. They're very creative.
Good. Well, any final thoughts?
I think that we should always continue to be optimistic when looking at Iran and when looking forward to the United States and Iran. I think we're turning a corner. And I hope to see Americans visiting Iran before not too long. And but I do caution everyone, this is going to be a long and rocky road to rapprochement.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Vakil, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
And thank you for the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bercia, and we'll see you next time.